All right. Um, if you want to, you might. Let's see. Well, now I don't have to ask the difference between equals and equals anymore. Hopefully not. Yes. If you're going to be a programmer, yes, that should be definitely something that sticks in your brain. If you're an artist, you might have to, you make that mistake. I mean, there are languages where the equals is also the comparison operator. I don't like those languages. The prime one is Visual Basic, and well, my older students know that I hate Visual Basic, but now you're learning it, right? Visual Basic's a crappy language, and if you can avoid programming in it, I would suggest doing so. All right, Jeopardy music, yes. All right, so writing C# statements properly. Right, so lesson class notes. Um, when you write normal sentences, there's a certain format you have to adhere to so that people understand what you're saying, right? And that format we call syntax. And even though, for whatever reason, and mostly because it's text, people seem to be losing some of that grammatical syntax, right? But when you're programming, you can't ignore it because the programming languages are they're called formal languages, right? They have very strict syntax, and if you don't follow the syntax, it doesn't work, right? So, whereas when you can text, you can leave out punctuation and periods and all that sort of thing. In C#, you have to put a semicolon at the end of a statement to note that it is the end of the statement. And if you don't do so, you will get this error here. You see error CS 1002 semicolon expected. All right. So if you want to go ahead and open up a Unity project, I'll go ahead and do that now too. So Unity, I haven't done it because it takes a while for Unity to launch. And call the project last name, first initial, underscore variables. I think that's what the assignment's called, if I'm not mistaken. Continue. Yes, it's called variables. All right. Lesson new dividends t variables. So they've already had one called a variable lesson. I'll call this variable class. All right. Variable class. All right. And create. This assignment you can't see yet because I'm going to modify it somewhat, right? So because this says this is in the book, they have since removed this from the book, from what I can tell, which is kind of annoying. But books change. But I'm going to require you to do something similar to this. So I have to modify it before I open it for you. But basically, you're going to create 4 variables, right? And then you're going to output the values of those variables onto the screen and into your console. Not real hard. I'm not trying to make it difficult on you, right? So let's go. I apologize for the slurping of coffee, but all right, let me see. Could you write multi-line mega statements? I'm not sure what a mega statement is. Just a really long statement, I guess. But yes, you can write multi-line statements. That's one of the things I like about the C family of languages and the semicolon is that your statement can be as long as it needs to be, and you don't have to do anything special when you have multi-line statements because the semicolon means the end of the line, right? Visual Basic, if you have multi-line statements, you have to put it's this little arrow thing at the end of each line. Is kind of a pain in the tail. I mean, it's very much a pain in the tail, so I don't like it. There's many I could go on for quite a while on why I don't like Visual Basic, but so avoid it. But yes, assuming a mega statement is just a really long statement, yes, unless there's some kind of special meaning to that I don't know. All right. So anyway, so this is a C# statement, public int number 1 equals 2 semicolon, right? And the statement can be on several lines like this, right? But that looks like crap, and you shouldn't do that because it's not easy to read, right? And as he makes the point, the compiler doesn't see the same thing we see, right? It sees everything as one long string of text, right? So the compiler doesn't care about the end lines and the new line characters and all that. It ignores them entirely, right? So we write code for ourselves so that we can read it, right? And you want to make it readable so that when you look back on it a month later, you can still understand what you're trying to do. All right. Here we talk about more of a unity thing. Let's see. What does he see? I'm going to rush ahead to see what he calls his script because there you go. See, he talks about a learning script, but he never tells you to create that, which is kind of that I've seen anyway. Kind of weird. So let's create a script. Let's go to Unity. Sorry, I'm all chaos this morning. Let's see. Create a folder first. We'll call it scripts, right? Scripts. Open that up. And we're going to create a learning script because that's what the author is calling his, right? I think in my video that I recorded, I didn't call it that because I was reading, in a linear way, and I didn't see him name the script until I got there, right? So anyway, learning script. All right, so like I said, we may not get through all this in this class, but I'm going to try to get through it. All right, and as you know, the correct way of opening these projects is to go to the Assets menu and open C# project, right? You're still loading. All right, that's fine. Just watch along. I'm going to try to get through as much as I can, but we'll see. I wish I could. There we go. How many of you are still loading? Anybody still waiting? I want to barrel ahead too fast, but speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, so we have a learning script open here. We can barrel ahead into the book. All right. Next. We talked about game objects last time, right? And components of game objects. So if you look in Unity here, right? If you click on, oh, I got to resize this window. You can do that. I click on the main camera, right? Everywhere you see a line in the inspector, that denotes a new component, right? So you have the transform. The transform is the number one component. It's the only component that's given to every object in the game, right? So if you created an empty game object, so just do that real quick. See, create empty. Note that Shift, Command, or Control N creates an empty game object, and these are very useful for organizational purposes, or when we create a game manager, which we'll be doing a lot of, right? Like that. If you look at the game, this empty game object is called the game manager now. There's only one component, right? And that's why there's an add component button down there. Every component is basically a script, right? So, but if you look at the camera, you have transform. There's a camera component, which is the script, basically, and an audio listener, which is another script. All right, so I think you're two minutes behind. Oh, that's fun. All right, well, I'm going to continue, right? See, this is why I recorded the video, because I don't have to pause in it. Oh, that's great. That is awesome. All right. So variables in your script become component properties, right? So, oh, man, I hate being laggy. I mean, it's almost pointless to even teach with lag. I mean, 2 minutes is a long time when you're sitting in one of these things to wait. I should test my. Yeah, the pain's pretty bad. All right. Anyway, I guess I can barrel through. I don't know. Waiting 2 minutes between everything I do is not feasible, really. So if we create a variable in a script like this, I can say public int, I don't know, my number or something equals 2. So are the yellow bars that appear when editing scripts just update indicators? Yellow bars. What yellow bars are you talking about? On the side. Not sure. It's a yellow bar probably. You mean the right side behind the number line? I'm trying to recreate that. I see yellow bar. I see bars on the right side that I'm not entirely sure what all those mean. Let me see if I hover over one, it'll tell me. If I create an error, right, I get red bars, and not entirely sure what those are telling me. There's an error somewhere, but I'm not sure what the bars are supposed to tell me. What version are you using, Jacob? Not sure, but it looks completely different from the teachers. Are you on a Are you on Windows? I assume probably. I can't speak to that. I don't. Yeah, I don't use visuals. I'm pretty sure the yellow means you've edited that line. It may. Um, I try to avoid Windows when I can. But that's probably he's probably right. Uh, Typically, yellow means a warning of some sort, right? And red means it's an error, which means an error you can't compile when there's an error. Usually, warnings you can compile, but it means that you had deprecated code or there's something there that it sees as a potential problem. Sometimes it's not a problem at all, right? I'll tell you that. And Visual Studio actually it does some stupid crap that I don't really like. Let me see. So I do public. I'm going to do this just to see if it works, right? Int my number 2. Well, it doesn't. All right. It used to say that you created this variable and you haven't used it yet. Actually, I may be thinking about Swift right now, but I know it'll warn you. It'll give you an error as soon as if you have a return. Like I say, I'm not going to do that right now. But there's sometimes it warns you about things that you haven't completed yet. Right? You're in the middle of creating something and it goes ahead and warns you. But all right, kind of how programming in general works, buddy. You don't like Visual Studio. It forces me to use specific syntax. Well, programming is that way certainly. It Visual Studio does enforce like things that aren't actually rules sometimes, or it'll warn you, right? Um, like I like to create. Well, I'll show you, right? I like to create scripts. When I'm creating my own scripts, I'm going to show you this. C# ignores white space. Visual Studio adds in things I find annoying. Yeah, it will sometimes add white space. I like white space. White space makes things look cleaner and easier to read. So you'll see me add white space even where Visual Studio probably doesn't. Yes, breathable. Yes. Um, yes. I like to name my scripts for a certain reason. Create with a S underscore, and it's a lowercase because it's not important, right? So if I'm creating scripts, I go S underscore my script like that. Visual Studio is not going to like that because the class is literally starting with a lowercase name, and it'll usually, or it used to give me, it doesn't though. Yep, see that those little dots there, right? Naming rule violation prefix S underscore is not expected, right? But it's not an error, right? But Visual Studio doesn't like it, right? So, but I don't really care about what it likes or doesn't like. I do that. This is kind of a Unity thing, really. I don't know if you were if you were doing C# programming for, Windows application, you might not do this. But what you'll find in Unity programming is that you're sometimes referring to scripts in your code, and sometimes you're referring to game objects in your code, right? And I'll name my scripts the same thing as my game object. So if I have a S underscore as my script name, when I'm referring to them, it's obvious in my code that I'm referring to a script and not the game object, if that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense now, it should make sense later. But anyway, I did all that to show you that Visual Studio doesn't like my lowercase letter and the underscore at the beginning. All right. I can understand that. Yes, the text editors IDEs. Did you figure out how to make Vim work? That's fine. Whatever works for you, that's fine. But I do this because it's out of the box and it, for the most part, works. Right? But anyway, so back to learning script. The point is, see, I knew we're not going to get through all this. All right. I guess we're still probably 2 minutes, but I'm 2 minutes behind, I guess. 30 seconds. Well, that's not too bad. All right. Well, variables become component properties, right? So let me take my learning script and I'm going to put it on my main camera. And you'll see now that my learning script is attached to my main camera. It is now a component. And my number variable is now a property of that component. Unity changes script and variable names slightly, right? This is a readability thing in Unity, right? If you look at the name in the inspector, learning script has a space between learning and script, right? Because it understands what camel casing is and it makes it more readable in Unity in the inspector that way. And my number does the exact same thing, right? I have named my number, it's one token, right? One word, my number. But if you look in Unity, it actually spaces them out and capitalizes the M. Right? Just so you don't get confused and think that they're two different things. All right. Changing a property's value in the inspector panel. There are two situations where you can modify a property value: during play mode and during the development stage when you're not in play mode. That reminds me, is there an actual reason to never capitalize the first letter in things, or is it just convention? Well, it's definitely just convention, right? And as the book states, the convention is variables should not be capitalized, and class names should be. That is the convention, right? And that allows you at a glance to know whether it's a class or it is a variable, right? I just showed you how I typically break convention by my scripts have a S underscore, right? And it's lower S. You could make it a capital S, I guess, and it would be. But then the S seems to have an importance that it doesn't to me, right? So that the letter after the underscore in my classes is always uppercase, right? But that's my convention, right? But it is just a convention. And that's what this warning is right here, is like it's saying you're breaking a convention, right? It says naming rule violation, prefix S underscore is not expected. All right. And you should adhere to conventions as much as possible because they're conventions for a reason, right? And it's very likely that if you work with a group of people that they all follow similar conventions. If they don't, they probably have their own, and you need to learn what those are and follow those. This keeps your code clean and makes it so everybody can understand what's going on. When you're in play mode, you can change things in the inspector, right? And it takes place in real time. When you stop it, those changes go away, right? And you really need to know that. This is not in the video that I recorded. This is important though, right? If I push play here, you'll notice, and I don't, if you're only 30 seconds behind, you'll notice that my screen turns slightly pinkish reddish, right? There's a play tint. If yours doesn't do that, you should probably set one, right? So I'm going to show you how to do that. Am I still just 30 seconds behind? Can you see the tint now on my screen? All right. So I'm going to stop it, and now I'm going to show you how to change your play tint, because it's important, because it allows you to know, it makes it very obvious that you're in play mode. And you want that to be obvious because, trust me, I've wasted 30 minutes to an hour of time doing a lot of work in the inspector, right? And not realizing that I was in play mode. And then after doing all this work and setting up the stuff, I look up and I go, man, I'm in play mode. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it at that point, but stop it and just lose your work, right? So you can lose a considerable amount of time if you don't realize you're in play mode, right? So you want to go up to, well, actually, in Windows, wherever preferences are, right? On a Mac, it's under the Unity menu and preferences. I think Windows is under Edit. Don't pick a very dark. Oh, no. You definitely don't pick a very... You want to be able to read what's in the inspector, right? So you play around with colors that make it obvious that you're in play mode, two, that you can read, right? But anyway, once you're in preferences, you can go up to General. Oh, I thought it was a General. They've moved it. Where is it? They have moved it. It's Colors. Yep. Yes. And you go to Colors and then General Play Mode Tint. And you click on that, and then you can change your color. Like I said, mine's it's almost a peach color, right? But I make it something that's going to be obvious to you. I mean, I'll change mine just to let you see it here, right? Maybe like that. But something that's not real dark, right? So choose that and then just test it out, right? So now I can tell that it's in play mode, but I can still read the text, right? All right, everybody got that? But you should definitely set a play mode tint. All right. Let's see. Displaying public variables in the inspector panel. We've already said and seen that anything that's public shows up in the inspector, right? That's obvious. If it's private, it does not. There are ways of flipping that. There are ways of obscuring public variables and showing private variables. I'm not going to get into that right now, but if you're interested in that, you can ask me later or, look it up. But not all variables need to be public, right? I, by default, because you should also know that changing a variable via the inspector does not change the code. Yes, it does say that in the book. I kind of skipped over that. Yes. It does not change the code. That is correct. And it will override what you put in the code, especially, and I don't want to get too deep into this, right? It will override any class variable declaration. So if you can see my code right here, right, it says my number equals 2. The inspector, if you put something different there, it will override that, right? But if you change that in one of these functions, that's going to override what you put in the inspector, right? Except at runtime, and then it's kind of a race depending on what's being declared where, really, right? And that'll make more sense when we get further down the road, I think. All right. Let's see. Like so, let's just do that. We can change this to private real quick, just to test it out and see that it'll go away in the inspector. Excuse me. Yeah, there we go. Took a second. All right, but we want that, so I'm going to put it back to public. All right. That. As he says, it's good practice to explicitly state whether a variable will be public or private. That way, when you look at your code, there's no question, right? You always want to make your code kind of bulletproof as possible. And if you put public or private on everything, then there's no question about what the protection level is, right? Yes, if you don't put public, it is by default private, right? And certainly the people you code with should know that, right? But if you have somebody new come onto your team and maybe they're not familiar with C# that much and they don't realize that, right? And if you always explicitly state it, it's obvious, right? All right. Naming your variables properly. Properly means making sure that they are as informative as possible, right? You want your code to read as much like English language as you can. And as you see here, he's got a public bool or road conditions perfect equals true, right? There's no question about what that's saying and what that means and what that variable is supposed to indicate, right? Here he says public bool perfect equals true. Well, perfect what, right? You don't know. When you write it, you may know what it means, but if you come back to it a month later, you will not, right? Or very likely you will not, and you want it to be very clear. Writing historical note, back in the 80s before code completion was a thing where the computer helped you write your code, we wrote shorter. What am I hearing? I don't know. We'd write short variable names because long variable names are harder to type, and you're more likely to have errors if you had long variable names. Now, with code completion helping us out, you should always make your variable names as long as necessary, but no longer than necessary, right? So put as much detail in them as possible. I don't know what that noise. Stop it! This is one of the reasons I hate working from home. Cats. All right. Anyway, distractions are hard. So we got about 10 minutes. All right. So, one second. I don't smack a cat. I hate working from home. All right. Let's see. Beginning variable names with lowercase. This is the convention we were talking about earlier. And this is why you do it, right? So Unity always capitalizes its class names, right? So the transform, when you see transform like that, that means you're talking about the class itself. If you see transform like this, that's an instance variable. That is a actual transform on a game object in the game, right? So that is the difference, and that is the reason for the convention, right? Because they already do it that way. If you do it that way, then it makes sense within the code that you're going to be working in. All right. Multi-word variable names, again, are road conditions perfect equals true. As you can see, there's 4 words there, right? And you'll notice that the first word's not capitalized, then after that, each word is capitalized, and we call that camel casing, right? That's to show these multiple words, and it makes it easy to see where the words begin, right? Um, it used to be back in the C days that people would use underscores to do this, but doing camel casing is one less keystroke per word, and this is really the standard way of doing this now, right? You don't see much underscore stuff anymore, and it's one less character as well. All right. Let's see, man, we're running out of time. All right, but we're getting there. Declaring a variable as type, right? There are only 3 absolute requirements to declare a variable, and they are as follows. We have to specify the type of data that a variable can store. We have to provide a name for the variable. We have to end the declaration statement with a semicolon, right? So this is kind of the template, right? Type of data, name of variable, semicolon. So like this. You can say int x semicolon, right? By the way, 2 slashes is a comment. I don't think he's covered that yet. Comment, right? And this is a bare bones declaration, right? Declaration just means you say, hey, I have this thing, and you're telling the compiler to go to random access memory and find a spot in memory and label it this thing, right? That's all you're doing. All right. So int number 1 semicolon. Right. Here we have the type of data is int. Requirement is number 1. I mean, the name is number 1, and the semicolon at the end. Comments for when you want to leave something snarky for the data miners. Yes. Or yourself later on. Yes. I've had many a snarky comment especially when you're having when you're trying to figure out bugs, right? And sometimes you've pared it down to where you know where the bug is kind of occurring in your code, but you can't really see, and then you can put some choice words for the compiler in there. How does data matter? It depends on the code, really. Some code is freely accessible, especially if it's, yeah, there too, yep. Or if it's a lot of web code, sometimes is not obscured and can be found that way too, right? But you're right, if it's compiled and proprietary, they shouldn't be able to get to that. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff on repositories like GitHub that are freely accessible. If they want to share it in text documents, but text documents aren't going to be compiled because they're not code per se. I mean, you can put code in text documents, but if it's a .txt, a compiler is not going to see it and treat it as code. Huh? I don't know. Google that one and get back to us. All right. So this bare minimum declaration, there's no public modifier, which means it's private by default. It won't appear in the inspector panel or be accessible from other scripts. Value stored in number 1 defaults to 0. This table here I put in our notes for a reason, right? See that? Memorize that, right? You hear me say that? Memorize that. Even if you're an artist, memorize it. There's only 4 things there, right? It's not hard. That is the bare bones of what you need to know as far as what a data type is, right? And you need to know those 4. That's all a float. Yeah, that's all a float is. Yep. And there's different types of floats. This isn't all of them, right? There's actually there's a thing called a double, right, which is a float that's that has twice as much accuracy, right? So it allows more numbers after the decimal point, which will probably only come into play if you're doing some kind of scientific work, right, where you really need that kind of accuracy. In games, close enough is good enough, right? So, but anyway, memorize these, right? So int is a simple integer, such as number 3 or -3, right? And there's no decimal point. Float are numbers with decimals. String are just characters, right? Which can include everything, really. And bool, which is either true or false. All right. We are about out of time, so let's see. Assigning values while declaring a variable. All right. When you assign a value, that's called, the first time you assign a value to a variable, that's called initialization, right? You should know that in Unity, if you don't assign a value, it defaults to 0. There are languages that do not do that, and you should know that. You should always try to assign a value before you use it, but because Unity public variables are in the inspector, it automatically defaults to 0 in the inspector. So that rule is kind of a hazy one, right? Let's see. All right, let's do this real quick. All right, so we're about out of time. I do this in the video, so I'm gonna watch this in a video, and you'll see that. All right. I just want to see if there's anything I definitely have to cover here. Where you declare a variable is important. So you could declare it here, right? You could declare one in here, and that makes a difference, right? This is what's called scope, right? The scope, like if you talk about the scope of a problem, right? If I say I'm having a problem with my dog peeing on the floor, the scope of that problem is very local, right? It's very personal, and that's not your problem, that's my problem, right? So the scope is not a huge problem, right? But if we say that, globally there's this pandemic that's going on, then that scope is a global problem, right? It affects everybody in the world, so the scope is larger, right? Variables have the same kind of thing. There are variables that are that can be accessed all through a project, right? Those are called global variables. If you just declare, I didn't mean to do that. This is called a class variable, right? Class scope, right? And if I come in here and start and say int x equals 10, this is a local variable. I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, this is one of those warnings that I was telling you about that's annoying, right? See, it's warning me that I've created this variable and I've never used it. I hate that warning, right? It's like, of course I've never used it. I just created the damn thing, right? So I don't know why it does that. See, if I say x equals 20 here, then that warning will go away. Well, no, it doesn't. Unnecessary assignment. This is an unnecessary warning is what it is, right? But I could go, if I just do this, debug.log, it should all go away. Yes. See, now I've used it in a meaningless way, but the warning goes away. All right, so anyway, scope is just telling you where that variable is defined in your code, and that's something that we'll talk about more later because I'm really out of time. If you need to go, you can, because it is technically past time now, right? All right, so before the day's over, I will this assignment here will be updated and for you, right? But basically, you're gonna declare 4 different variables, at least 4. If you want to do more than 4, that's fine. And you can name them whatever clever thing you want to name them. But there needs to be an int, float, string, and bool. And then we're going to output those things to the screen. Right, so this week's assignment is just doing chapter 3. Yes, this week's assignment is just doing chapter 3, yes. And, well, I mean, this is no longer in there, right? So the assignment is actually outside of the book, right? So I just have to update this. It appears here that it is in the book, but it used to be. It's no longer in there, right? So I need to update this so it doesn't imply that it is in the book, so I don't get the confusion that I've had in the past. All right. Are there any questions about last week's assignment or this one for that matter? But I haven't posted it yet. I'll stop recording.